Okay, it looks like our numbers have settled out a little bit, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Hey, Kristen Thornton, nice to see you. So for those of you that I don't know, my name is Melissa Chapman, and I run Part 2 Consulting. I am also a collaborator with Rob Beeler on all things Beeler Tech, and I'm a huge fan of Ad Monsters. I have helped moderate this session, this topic, probably more than a couple of times over the years because it's one of my favorites. So hiring, training, and managing people. So in March, I was in Santa Monica at the Publisher Forum, and we didn't have this session, but if we did, it would have been very different than the session we're having now in the midst of a pandemic. So shit is crazy, right, this year in all parts of our lives, but work has been heavily impacted. So, it gives us quite a backdrop for this conversation. So that's really where we're going to focus our time, right? I mean, we've got a global pandemic and, first one for me. We've got terrible problems with our economy, and we've got what I hope is the beginning of a real reckoning about racial injustice in this country. So I'd like to kind of, we can chat around those areas. So we're gonna talk about ladies. They're gonna share a little bit about, what have you been doing this year and how's it been working? What's worked for you? Mm-hmm. What maybe didn't work as awesome and you'll tweak in the future? Any tips and tricks for things you've done. And I say tips and tricks, and that makes it sound kind of flippant, and I don't mean it flippantly. I just mean things that you've been like, yeah, this hit, whether it was a little thing or a big thing. So we want people to walk away and have a little bit more information that might be useful to them, if at all humanly possible. And then what are you thinking about for the future, right? As we're going into 2021, still in a pandemic, but we hope that we'll be coming out of the other end of it before the year's out, right? Hopefully before summer. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on here. So I'm super excited to have this brainiac crew of ladies here with me. I'm happy to say that I call all of them my friends. So we're going to be keeping an eye on the chat. Specifically, I'll be, hi, everybody. Keeping an eye on it. So if you have questions or comments or want to join the conversation, I will do my best to blend it into the conversation, but please share away. And then ladies on the panel, for as much, I guess it's not a panel, this is more of a round table discussion. So ladies at the round table, the virtual round table, if you could just say your company name and when you first speak, so everybody kind of gets a feel. And with that, shall we kick off? All right. So I always like to start with a big fat question because it'll kind of set the pace for what you guys want to talk about. And that is, right, pandemic, how have things been different? And then specifically, right, how do you see those differences playing out post-pandemic? Do you see them carrying through there or becoming something more different or going back to the way they were? Who'd like to start?
I can start.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Jennifer Castillo, and I'm the Senior Director at Slate. Pandemic. So things for us changed pretty quickly. I was at Ad Monsters with you and remember returning to my apartment and no office. We had implemented a work from home. I think from management perspective, I had to adjust a little to the day-to-day. I was used to seeing my teams come in. We would start the morning just chatting. I think the way that we've sort of adjusted that is every morning when we log in, we go into our shared Slack and greet everybody and, sort of have a slight conversation about how the day's gone or anything that you've sort of experienced either the night before or over the weekend, depending on the day, just so that there's a bit of human interaction and it's not just, a transactional thing, getting down to the nitty gritty. We've had to adjust a lot of the stuff. I think we were used to, obviously gathering and having drinks and happy hours and stuff. And I think at the start of the pandemic, we were doing virtual happy hours, and it's sort of, I think people are kind of tired of the ongoing Slack meetings and the many meetings that you're, scheduled on a day-to-day. So we've had to find a good balance and what works for everybody. I think it's been something that we've all sort of adjusted, and we've realized that maybe we don't all need to be in, all the meetings that are on our calendar. So removing some of that overflow, I think, has also been an adjustment for us as well. What I would like to keep is, the removal of non-essential meetings. I think that's a big one, just because I think it sort of really affects how your day goes, and leaves a lot more time for brainstorming and doing things that you and the teams can sort of combine and do better. So,
Jen, this is Kristen Corriero from Crane Communications. I would love to hear your definition of non-essential meetings. Because I haven't found that in the dictionary as of late.
I think if you hit me up and say, hey, do you want to join this meeting? My answer is always going to be, do I need to be on this meeting? Do you want me to participate, and do you need my opinion? If you need me in that meeting, sure, I will join. If you're just asking me, do I want to be? Because you need moral support, I will be there for you via Slack.
Right.
I'm there to support you and give you any answers. But again, if I'm not essential, I would rather not be. I think it gives, flexibility and freedom for the team to make decisions on their own and grow. So I think that was a thing that I had to adjust a ton during the pandemic, and I want to keep doing, because I think at this level, we just, our calendars are literally stacked with meetings, and they're not necessary.
Mm-hmm. I see Anne over there nodding, right? She's about to hurt herself. Did you find, Jennifer, did you make a concerted effort with you and your team to do that, or did it just kind of naturally start happening because of meeting fatigue?
I think it naturally started happening. I started to realize, folks would just ask me, hey, do you want to join this meeting? And I'm like, well, one, you have to schedule around a very large group, which makes scheduling any meetings extremely difficult, especially when we're all just bombarded with meetings. And again, it was dependent on, is the owner of this meeting, are they comfortable being in that position? And are they comfortable, in making executive decisions and just leading that meeting on their own? If they are, then I'm not needed. So I would make sure to always ask, do you need me there? And if, it turned out to be no, then my answer is no.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. Anne from Cox Automotive. Quick response there in terms of meetings. We did have, from the highest level down, we tried to incorporate no meetings Wednesday mornings or Wednesday afternoon. So we have the span of the US, so everyone's in different time zones. I will say, I don't think it has worked out the way that we intended to. I think we tried to do it for, a month or so, but, as everybody knows in automotive, we do have an upfront season, and we're going to market with some really exciting products. So the meeting schedule has been heavy. But I love the idea, Jennifer, of empowering people as individual leaders to say, do I need to be here? Do I not need to be here? Can I send somebody else and do some delegation? That's a really great idea.
I think, sorry, Melissa, if I could just add something interesting that's happened this year, because I have been trying to delegate my entire career, actually. But this year it's been interesting because we have had to support each other, not only just in meetings, but in mental well-being and through sickness and in health as colleagues. And so it's been very interesting for me to kind of watch my teams step into more of a personal role with their colleagues to say, I know that you're sick or your family is sick. We're all exhausted. We have fatigue. Let me take this off your plate, or can you help me with this? It sort of lends itself to meeting fatigue because we're like, okay, I know you're stressed out, so let me do all these things. But it has been an interesting shift in not only focusing on business well-being, but personal mental health of our colleagues and employees.
That's an interesting it's actually been a big focus for me this year, is I feel like, so I'm a personal sharer by nature. Most of you know that about me. And merging home and business, I'm fine with. But I think it can get a little sticky. But I feel like, especially with everybody working from home, there was a lot more of that sort of thing. And so how did that, I mean, you talked about the interesting and supporting one another. Other ladies, was that a real challenge in your groups? Was that a good thing?
Yeah, I could chime in there. I'm Janelle Falk. I run ad operations at Bloomberg, and I think it's very much a challenge. It was a challenge for me as an introvert, and so I very much lean into my introvert tendencies as a leader, but it also is very challenging. And in the spirit of sharing, I live in a tiny studio apartment in New York City. So no one had seen my tiny studio apartment until we all started working from home in March. And then everybody was like, oh, Janelle, your apartment's so cute. And I'm like, it's this one room. And so I remember meeting with someone. They're like, oh, you're in the kitchen. I would be like, the kitchen is one wall of the apartment. I'm never not in the kitchen. So that was definitely it was a barrier that I personally had to break through. Of all of a sudden, I was physically living with my colleagues because I was on video all day long and they were in my one living space. And so how did I navigate that? But then also going back to Kristen's point about mental health, making sure that that was top of mind with the team, carving out the space to talk about it or not, because not everybody was particularly comfortable talking about it. So instead of like leaning in every time to be like, so how are you feeling today?
Right.
You're like, tell me how you're feeling today. Like, no, really. And so I was actually talking about that with a colleague the other day of what is the fine balance with having those conversations so everybody feels supported, but also not overburdened by having those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can completely see that. Please, somebody?
Yeah, I think it was very important for us to, as a team, just stay, in constant communication with each other and checking in everyone's mental health. Because I think overall, particularly with, how things transitioned into, the Black Lives Matter movement, it just became a very sensitive time. And so as a group, we wanted to make sure that we were supported and that we were being supportive of each other. So we were constantly, sharing experiences with each other. And I think it just made the group a lot closer than what we had originally been before the pandemic, which I think, hopefully we want to keep that and transition that once we're back in the office. Because I think it just makes for a much, I think, intimate and real relationship as a group.
I agree. I think one of the, the response from Cox in terms of all of the mental health, free applications and conversations that you can join, and Care.com for free and Headspace for free, all of those things are great. My team specifically, we have a touch base every other week where it's just open forum, right? Sometimes I might cover a couple HR topics, but it's really just for people to share funny stories or share how they're struggling or share movies that they're watching or a new series on Netflix or Hulu that they love. And we created a Teams channel called Quarantine. And so we also stay in constant communication via the Teams channel, which has really helped. And I think we already had kind of an on-video policy, but what I've noticed is myself specifically and my leaders being a little bit more vulnerable, right? Every morning is different. We can't put makeup on every day. We're not getting ready and going into the office. We're literally getting out of bed and coming into the next room or sitting in the same room and starting to work right away. So I've noticed that the expansion kind of the vulnerability, which is really healthy for the team, and in sharing how space and how we're looking and how we're feeling, all of that.
Those meetings that you have, Anne, every other week, is that just kind of an open forum, like show up if you wanna, or is it the whole team and then they share
So
what
we
they
did a
wanna?
poll and I said, would you be interested in doing this? And I have a lot of outgoing people who love to connect on the team. So it is, I guess I would say it's required, but it's that we're there to have a good time and to just, it's not like there's no actual agenda. It's just show up however you are. And like I said, sometimes I cover some HR topics, but really it's just to connect and see each other. So we do it on Zoom instead of Teams, because on Zoom, you can see everybody's faces, and on Teams it's limited to, I don't know what it is now, 9 or 12. So that way we can flip through and see everybody, and it's really just to get our eyes and connect and talk about whatever we want to. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Couple things coming through from the groups asking about, training development, like how has that worked during the pandemic and keeping people's development up while they're working from home? Does anybody want to speak a little bit about
that a little bit? Hi, I'm Leanne. I work at the PGA Tour. So for us, it was a very interesting, I know it has been for everyone, but being in sports, really transitioning to a period of time where we were in full suspension. It transitioned our business significantly, and we had just onboarded a large number of newer employees that really needed to get their feet kind of wet and hit the ground running. And we went into this period of time where we were just at a halt. And it impacted all areas of our business differently, where some were more busy just from the sense of kind of trying to reorganize and re-strategize. But when you think about it from the area of business as it relates to someone who is maybe in a trafficking role or a systems role, and there's none of that day-to-day work, it was really a difficult transition. And so one of the ways that I kind of went about that was I had to transition where people would normally have that everyday experience by actually carrying out the task, and kind of pivoted to a really school. It was interesting because we're all going through the home schooling if you have children at the same time, and thinking about it in that respect, that you really had to kind of transition back to actually teaching and learning. And so what I did was I put together a training document that took all of the concepts and the exercises that were core to being really successful in that role, and I just put them in this doc that was essentially an open book test. And what it did is it created the necessity to kind of go through those things, but it also created the opportunity to collaborate with others, because that was another piece that was missing, was that we were so cross communication. But if there's no business coming in and there's no transactions, then that piece of it really kind of halted. And so newer hires didn't have the opportunity to collaborate or communicate regularly. So that was really helpful with that, because they had to go through the steps. It was, they had to fact find. They were able to kind of continue to do the repetitive work, which is really important in this area. And they were also able to kind of build those relationships and kind of develop.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and hiring, increasing the size of your team so much right at the very same time. And I think, not all of you had work from home prior, or you didn't have it on the regular. So can we talk a little bit about how working from home, if you weren't working from home, obviously is an adjustment in the first place, but then to people working from home and they have specific challenges at home, whether they have kids or other caretaking things or whatever the thing is that makes their life more complicated or their schedule off. Does anybody want to touch a little bit on getting through that, or not? I shouldn't say getting through, because we're not through it, right? But navigating that a little bit.
I can jump in. I think one of the things that was a bit challenging at first is particularly because, you're sort of coming into the office and you can see people in their desks and you can see that they're doing stuff, is developing a lot of trust for your team, and giving them the space and the time to do things, within I think the timelines that work for them, but that is also allowed and appropriate for your clients. So, not pinging people multiple times, asking where's this thing, because you do not know their situation. You have no idea, what they're dealing with on the other end. So I think just finding that good balance of, time management with the teams, but also being sensitive to their personal times and what they're doing. And I think also encouraging your team to disconnect at a certain time, because we're all sitting, in our rooms. You can literally drag your laptop to your couch and just continue working, making sure that your team gets that time for themselves and that they're not, answering emails at 9 o'clock in the evening, that they're managing that time properly. So that has been a bit of adjusting and getting used to and coaching the team and, ensuring that they're doing that and having conversations with people that are abusing that time as well. We need to be super cognizant that from a sales perspective, urgent is always urgent, regardless of your time. And so I think now you see that a bit more being abused. So having those conversations of saying, this person will answer you when they have time. If, you think that within an hour or 2 hours is not sufficient, then let me know and I will escalate, but don't harass somebody 3-4 times within a 10-minute span because you have to be cognizant of their situation. So I think those were some of the things that we had to really adjust and that we're still adjusting to, and that we hope that is one of those things that we follow through, I think, post-pandemic as well.
And I can jump in.
Very
I
nice.
completely
Yeah, I was just going to ask Janelle,
I completely
please.
agree, because that is something that is an ongoing challenge before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and something we hope to take as a learning coming out of the pandemic is the need that everything is always urgent, but knowing that we have to respect everybody's time and being flexible with everybody's time. So making sure that we're setting boundaries, but then providing that flexibility if somebody needs to work outside of those boundaries, so that way they can meet their other responsibilities while balancing their work, but then not extending the workday exponentially. So just because somebody might need to work outside of the normal business hours, whatever we deem those to be, that doesn't mean that everybody else needs to respond right away when somebody sends an email or a Slack message. So that way we're carving out the time for people to have the flexibility, but also to take the breaks that they need. And then also setting up the boundaries with our various constituents and stakeholders internally, because something might be urgent to someone, but it may not be urgent to us. And so how do we balance all of those needs while also meeting and upholding our SLAs, our service level agreements?
So have you guys found, because everything you said makes sense, but it makes me wonder, do you as leaders in your organization end up working more because you have to help navigate the constituents and the people that need flexible schedules and all of that? Are you finding yourself more tapped because of that?
Yeah, for sure. But I think one of the most intriguing things that I found is like people's schedules are taking center stage, in that I have someone who likes to start work at 5 a.m. So he logs on at 5. I know he logs on at 5. He takes a break at from noon to 2. He logs back on. He has this crazy preferred schedule that works for him. And it helps me out because it kind of helps out other people who might only have to work during a certain time because their kids are in school in the morning or in the afternoon or whatever. So these natural preferences are kind of coming to light, and I'm able to support the business in a different, maybe better way. I'm not sure if we're going to continue this next year, but in a more intriguing way, because he's like, don't worry, I'll get it from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., all the urgent stuff. And if there's an emergency, people are kind of more flexible because we can be, because we're working from home. So it's been interesting in that respect, but I'm definitely putting in more hours this year. There's also a much higher demand, Melissa, from sales. I think this is a very valid point of we're really urging our sales teams to get out there, connect with their clients, get all the revenue they can. Cranes has a huge event business that obviously did not do very well this year. So we had to pivot very quickly. So there's a lot of pressure on them, which means, of course, there's a lot of pressure on operations because we have to support them. And I think there's a lot of, on my teams, both print and digital, not guilt, but some feeling of responsibility to say, if I don't respond to this email at 10:30 p.m., we're going to lose this account. And then, all hell is going to break loose. So I've been trying to manage well. Yeah, we shouldn't go down that road. We all know that road.
So I'm going to let that one just lay. Yeah, I mean, right. That's an ongoing balance, even in the before times. We did have a question that came in that I thought, I wasn't sure. Has anybody onboarded new folks during the pandemic? And we've got somebody who lost someone and is anxious about backfilling, right? They're feeling uncomfortable about it because they've never done it before in this sort of virtual world. Leanne, I know you've had newer people, but I don't know, is anybody onboarded during?
I have. Yes.
Janelle,
so
please.
I have onboarded.
Tell us the goods
and
and the bads.
bad. So the good part about it is the flexibility around interviewing. So when you're onboarding during a pandemic, you have more flexibility on the interview time, like we were talking about with the meetings on our schedule. So yes, the interviewing process will take a longer period of time, but to some extent, it's a little bit more fluid because you're not pressed to, I need to find a meeting room at this particular time in order for a candidate to come in before their workday or after their day ends. We're all working from home and we're all working. So the time that one can interview is a little bit more fluid. So that's helpful. And then on top of that, once we get the candidate in the door, that's when the structure takes over with onboarding the person. So making sure that we have a very structured plan for that individual once they join the company. What does the training look like week 1? What does it look like week 2? So that way we can present them with something when they walk in the door, as opposed to like, oh, you're here. This is so exciting. Oh gosh. So you're going to talk to this person today, and then I'll get back to you. So we want to make sure that there's structure.
Now, did you have that plan? Yes, sorry. Did you have that structure in place in the before times, or is that something you had to build out?
A little bit of both.
In the current?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So we did have a structure a little bit before, but we had to spend time thinking about how we wanted to make it more structured in the pandemic.
Anybody else have anything in that area? It sounds like we've got a couple people that are going to be onboarding or hiring people. Okay. So we could just touch on this briefly. I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't. It's been a hard time. I went a number of weeks where every week I was talking to a friend that got laid off, right? Like there was a lot of cuts through the pandemic. Have you guys had to deal with the fallout from that? And how has that worked for your organization or your team, whether that's tactical work or, morale?
I can touch on that just a little bit. Cox Auto has many, many businesses across the United States. And there are some teams that could work from home and some that cannot, right? Just as the nature of their role within the organization. They did their best to keep most of those people on as long as possible, I will say, really. But we definitely have we've seen some impacts across ad operations. Certainly, we had to go through a number of start, stop, continue exercises. We had to extend SLAs, all of those things, that you have to do with less people. We've always been a fan of outsourcing right within our campaign management group. So that has stayed steadfast and is definitely helping the team and will continue to help the team through upfronts. But we have just had to look at what the team was producing and doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis and say, we can't do it anymore. Or we can only do it on Wednesdays now instead of every day of the week. Those types of activities have helped ease the burden of losing some people.
Well, I'm glad to hear that some of the expectations have shifted, right? Because that helps a lot, because back to our prior topic about if you're trying to get people to have a good work-life balance and you're giving them some flexibility, but you're giving them more work, you don't wiggle things. Okay.
I think now that you mentioned, I think when we started to see the massive layoffs show up in all of the trade publications, I think people definitely felt job insecurity. And luckily for us at Slate, we did not have to lay off anybody, but we did do some cuts. So everybody sort of took a for the team and sort of had a bit of pay cut for some time, just so that we could all say, at the end of this, our jobs are okay. But you can tell that everyone was very hesitant and felt that they had to put extra. So you can see that people were working even more hours for quite some time because they were afraid that, potentially they would get cut. And it was very hard to sort of navigate through that as a manager, to have to continuously reinforce to your team, like, we're doing everything possible to continue operating and to try to keep the teams as is, and to keep your job safe. So it was very I think a very sensitive and touchy time for probably the first 6 months of the pandemic, and I think until now, I don't know if people are feeling 100% secure about where the industry's transitioning. So it's something that you have to constantly, I just think, remind the team that they're valued, and that you value their work, and that anything that you can do to sort of ease that anxiety is very much welcomed.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do feel, at least people talking about it, I do feel like there was just like everybody was at the wall trying to do everything they could. Like, if somebody's going to get cut, it's not going to be me. I work 80 hours a week. I mean, it was just desperation, right? Which may or may not have been how those played out when they had to play out. But so it's a good call. And I'm hopeful that has relaxed. And I mean, as calm and as we can feel in the middle of a freaking pandemic. But okay, let's pivot a little bit here, because I really want to talk about what, if anything, your organizations have done about and around diversity, inclusion. I'd like to hear a little bit about conversations that, are less about company policies and processes and more about things that have actually happened. But Janelle, I'm actually going to lean to you to kick this off, because I know that Bloomberg has done a lot in this area, and you've been instrumental in that.
Yes, thank you for that. I co-lead the Diversity and Inclusion Committee within the Bloomberg Media's Americas group, and I work on that with two other colleagues that co-lead it with me. And during the summer, around the racial events here in June, we really did accelerate our efforts around diversity and inclusion. In fact, the CEO was paramount, our Bloomberg Media CEO was paramount in pushing us to think bigger and bolder around that acceleration. And as part of it, we had some particular plans in place, for example, diversity and inclusion dialogue. So convening a panel of internal colleagues to talk about specific topics, whether those topics are comfortable or uncomfortable. So then we spun one up really quickly in June to have a conversation about race in the Americas. Then we replicated that in the other regions, in EMEA and in APAC as well. We also had planned to put out a newsletter. So we had literally a draft of the newsletter, and then all of the events happened in the US, and we scrapped that draft. We had the framework, but then we revisited all the information we wanted to share with our colleagues. And then from there, we were able to iterate on our diversity and inclusion efforts, including making the diversity and inclusion arm to be more encompassing of culture. So we actually folded in a separate culture task force that we had internally. And so now the group is inclusion, diversity, and culture, which I feel is very helpful to address some of those morale challenges or some of the anxiety within the company overall, because now we're having these uncomfortable conversations pretty regularly.
Who's attending those dialogues that you mentioned?
So it's senior leaders, actually. And so similar to what Anne was mentioning about Microsoft Teams, we use an internal proprietary video software where you can only have like a certain amount of tiles on the screen at once. And so one idea from one of the co-leads in the committee was, let's show senior leadership on the video, essentially like how you see us now, the 6 of us, in a Brady Bunch type wall, where you have senior management, they are physically there and they're listening to the panelists that are speaking about the particular topics. And we wanted to do that to show the broader media organization that senior management is here, they are listening, they are learning along with all of us. And so it's open to all of the media employees to attend.
That's good.
Who else? Have your organizations, Anne, I think I see you nodding there.
Yeah, Cox has, right away really leaned in on the diversity and inclusion response. So just like Janelle, I think we started right from the senior leadership down, having those open dialogue conversations, having the leaders leading those conversations and asking people to share their experiences. And I definitely have to say, like, there's some tears shed on those calls, and really just people learning about each other across the United States, and helping people with compassion, right? Hearing directly from some of the employees and their experiences. And we've continued those throughout the organization, but maybe in smaller groups now. So like in our Enterprise Media Solutions group, we have kind of our own separate meeting where we talk about all types of things, right? We talk about struggling with COVID, we talk about diversity, and some of the things that Cox is doing, like at the overall organizational level, they're actually now making sure that women and people of color in the organization have more opportunity, and that we're focusing on those hypo, that is what we call them, high potential individuals, making sure that they have a career path within the organization, and they're actually measuring that now on a monthly basis. So they're taking it very seriously, and it's something that's going to continue throughout. We also have employee resource groups. I won't take up all the time here, but that covers like the gamut of everything, right? It's Pride, it's Ignite, which is really helping to inspire like the young career individuals. We've got the Mosaic multicultural organization, Women with Drive, and then Salute, which is like for the veterans. So they're really, really leaning in and making sure that people are participating in all of those groups.
That's great. Thinking about, so both of your organizations, right? You're both with large organizations. You've got, it sounds like, corporate kind of buy-in, support, encouragement. That's not the right word, but sponsorship, if you will. How has it played out for anybody, like in your teams? Jen, you mentioned, right, some conversations around Black Lives Matter. How is that on a day-to-day when it's not just a corporate I don't mean corporate in a negative way, but I mean corporate in a big structured way. Anything?
For us, I think it was super personal. Because we're a small organization, and I think before the pandemic, I think, from a cultural standpoint, everyone was fairly close. You'd congregate in the kitchen and sort of have conversations about anything. One of the things that we did immediately when we started seeing the unrest was do an open forum. So we had a meeting with everybody, and everyone sort of had the opportunity to say their piece, to talk about how they were feeling, to talk about what was angering them. We created a Slack channel for people to just go and say whatever emotions they were feeling, not only because the unrest, but particularly the election. It was just a very emotional year for everyone. So
agreed.
Overall, as an organization, we tried to leave as much open room for people to express their feelings as possible. And as a team, always be on top of your employees and ask, how are you doing? What can I do? How can I help you? Is there anything, that as an organization we can do and improve on to assist here? And from an HR perspective, we received a lot of resources around, who to contact. They provided us with mental illness awareness and tools to sort of have conversations, because it was obvious that, not everyone was comfortable speaking out in public.
For sure.
What you might say to a friend, you might not say to a colleague. So ensuring that there were those resources for people to speak outside of the work organization were extremely important and instrumental, I think, and just ensuring that all of your employees have some sort of mental stability during the time. So that was very important for us.
Yeah, and I think that, it stitches back to, right, giving people comfort in the way they want, whether you're more introverted or you're not introverted and you've got a work relation. Some people are fine with blending that and some people aren't, right?
Exactly.
Especially when you start to talk about racism and politics, right? That can get, and you don't want any of that to blow back on you.
Exactly.
So there's got to be some safety and security there, right? I need to be able to, you ask me to say my piece, you need to let me say my piece and not hold it against me. Right?
Exactly. There's a bit of concern that potentially, some folks might be able to speak fairly freely, where others, might not feel as free and might feel that there might be some retaliation if they said something. So having that opportunity to say, you can say whatever you want here. No one will respond back in a demeaning or rude manner. Your opinion is your opinion, and you're obviously able to express your feelings, but also here's this tool in case that you are not comfortable in having this conversation, with your peers and your superiors and so on. So just making sure that those resources were available as well.
That's great. So we've got about 5 minutes left here. Let's think about looking forward into, because my goodness, as I was ranting about earlier, right, it's December 9th. We're almost done with this year. As you're looking into 2021 and hopefully the pandemic getting, us being able to be back in person, whenever that is, but hopefully next year sometime, right? Like, what are you thinking about things that'll change or the things that you want to keep working on? And it can be any of the areas we talked about today. Do you have anything top of mind?
I think this panel is a good start to elevate women in the ad tech space. So my goal is to continue, I think, pushing. My team is mostly made up of women, so I want to continue elevating women and empower us to, have that seat. I think at any conference or any table with the guys and feel comfortable in having those tough conversations. So 2021 and on.
Awesome.
I second that.
Leanne, were you? Please, Kristen.
Go ahead, Leanne. I was just agreeing.
No, I agree as well. And for me, I think we've talked about it a few times, but just really embracing the idea of flexibility and what that means moving forward. I think like eliminating the thought of a standard 9 to 5 workday being, the norm, and allowing people to really create a work schedule that works with their lives, and kind of also focuses on that mental health aspect that we've chatted about as being really important as well, and not letting those things fall by the wayside when and if we do return back to the quote unquote normal office lifestyle.
Yeah, I think this time Melissa has also shed a lot of light on some things that we can improve on, like SLAs come to my mind, a bunch of workflows. You know me, we're all operations people. So I'm like, oh, we got to fix that in 2021. But I think it gives us an opportunity to push forward instead of saying, well, that's how we've always done it, or this is my comfort zone, so I'm going to continue doing this, because this year we've all been out of our comfort zone. And I would like to strive to push my teams to continue reaching outside of their comfort zones to push the business forward and become industry leaders in our knowledge space. So
that's great.
I agree with all.
Yeah, please.
No, I agree with all of you. I think that we will likely continue more remote working than we had in the past, and maybe just get together when we need to collaborate. There's no official word on that yet, but we've been able to show that the team is doing just as much at home as they have in the office, and sometimes even more, right? And to piggyback off of Kristen, like just really empowering all of the individuals to have individual leadership, and just, if you see something that's going, awry, that might not be like right within your realm or sphere of influence, try to go change it. And I think just more empowerment next year for sure.
So, no, please.
I completely agree as well. Oh, sorry, Melissa, but pushing the teams more towards a solutions-oriented mindset and a growth mindset of how can we take whatever it is that's in front of us, whether it's getting outside of our comfort zone, fixing a workflow, something outside of our sphere of influence, but then creating solutions around that and thinking about the solution as a way to move forward. That, and of course, support and respect
100%.
for all of our colleagues.
Yeah, I love this idea of, and it just threaded through everything each one of you said, which is, I'm going to add some extra words, right? 2020 was a hell of a year, but as long as we had to rip the Band-Aid and deal with some different stuff, we're going to take that opportunity, because people don't like change as a rule, right? Like, we don't like change. So let's take that opportunity to really implement some change where it makes sense and empower our people. I like that a lot.
And Melissa, we've really been faced with
please.
our own strength this year. I mean, like, how would we have known that we could overcome all these things or work together to work through things of this nature? And I think that we should all be proud in looking toward 2021 to say, I'm strong enough to do this, and we can work together to get to a common goal and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, and honestly, as we get to the after times, or whatever we might call them, right? Because I don't think they're going to be as clear cut as the before times and now, to say, as a few things get easier, right? People that are working from home, that maybe it doesn't work for them to work from home. It's making it real hard, right? We should be able to leverage those strengths and also lean back in some areas where things maybe aren't quite as hard. And that'll only make us stronger and faster and better. And with that, we are at time. I just wanted to comment on one thing that Jen, you said, because it speaks so closely to my heart, and this group happens to be an all-female group, is I am always out there for empowering the women. And I think that each in our own